Why, hello everyone. My name is Windy Hair.
And this is Mike-And-Ike, Windy Hair's brother.
Sister.
Brother.
Alright, sister. Whatever you say. Okay. Anyway, we are here to talk about AAA games and the advantages and disadvantages of them.
As well as indie games. Basically the benefits and the problems that result of the two styles of game development.
And so what's the disadvantages of, well, AAA games?
In my opinion, what happens with a AAA game is because it's so tied to the publisher and the profits of the publisher, there's a big incentive to keep costs of production down. Well, I mean, as long as the costs end up giving you a big reward, it's fine. But they're weighing different alternatives and seeing which one has the lowest production cost and the highest potential profit. So what that means is that games which innovate a whole new style of gameplay, which tend to be more expensive, are only justified if other options, such as recycling the same old content, don't provide similar or comparatively similar profits.
So what you're saying is so an example is Call of Duty Black Ops 2. So it's almost exactly the same as all the other Call of Duties, right? Except with better graphics and maybe a few new additions, right?
Yeah, so the main competition with Call of Duty is obviously Battlefield.
Battlefield?
Yes, the Battlefield line. And they're trying to attract primarily newer gamers. That's the market that they're both vying for. So because of that, they know that if they spend their time creating an entirely new game with entirely new gameplay, their older lines, which won't receive updates in terms of graphics and gameplay, will suffer. And they won't get significantly larger sales from their new game than they would have from their updated title.
But
so basically what I'm saying is that either way, they get pretty much similar sales from newer gamers. The only difference is that their sales versus the competing line suffer.
right. So an example of all the things you just said right there is they bake a cake far in advance, and we'll say the cake is the game engine, and then they put icing on it, which is graphics and maybe a few additions here and there, and then a few years later, like with Black Ops, they lick all the icing off the cake and then they just put new icing on, but they leave everything else, right?
Well, perhaps a slightly gross example. I certainly wouldn't like to eat cake that somebody licked the icing off of, but it is kind of like that. They'll use the same basic idea and provide some surface innovations, but they won't really make significant changes to the core of the gameplay.
Alright, so with right here on Homefront, what do you think of this? I mean, it's kind of like Call of Duty, but a slight mix with Battlefield because it has vehicles, but it doesn't have the competition. It's more of a single player, if you've seen all the gameplay so far. I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, it's kind of combining both. Is that a bad thing?
What do you mean in terms of single player? Can you explain that?
As in, teamwork is one of your least priorities because your teammates are always so stupid that you don't even want to play with them.
I don't really think that stupidity of player base is a problem that the developers can really address. It's kind of out of their hands. But in terms of Homefront itself, I think that you can definitely see that Homefront was going for the markets of Call of Duty and Black Ops, and that it has the same formulas that we're used to. It's a very clear, good old USA versus
Koreans.
Yeah, communists.
I guess the Koreans are communists.
Well, North Koreans.
KPA.
That's the whole point of the KPA. Yeah. So we have our good old America versus those socialists. And
communists.
Communists, yes. And we have a control point system. You have points that are used to buy upgrades similar to Black Ops, which are dependent upon things like kill streak and that sort of thing. You have some interesting innovations here and there, like when you get a big kill streak, you're marked on people's maps for elimination. So you have some surface innovations, and you have some graphical, unique graphic design. But it's really, when you get down to the core of the gameplay, it really is similar to the precedents set by Call of Duty and by Battlefield.
I just killed that person's drone by accident. I thought the dead guy was a person.
And then you explode.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
so basically would be no difference between basically buying like a Homefront and anything else, because it's basically just, like AAAs have been focusing on like shooters. It's always like the same gameplay, just with new things slightly added to it. I mean, like shoot this, shoot that. No teamwork or teamwork. There's not many options. So I guess that could be a problem with AAAs, right? But what would you think would be the advantages of AAA?
Well, there are advantages in that they stick with a model that works. In general, I've been entertained by most of the AAA games that I've played. I mean, I don't really see any reason to choose one AAA game versus the other, but overall, it works.
Okay.
It works well enough for them to use it.
So on to indie games. As you can see, we're playing. Me and Mike. I mean, what would you, with the advantages? I'm guessing that it would be they're less tied to a specific idea. I mean, you have millions and not millions, but thousands of games that are always different. I mean, you have like Bastion, which is like a narrative hack and slash, and then you have this game, I Divine Cybermancy.
Yeah, a game which is very focused on the atmosphere, the visual, but not so much having well-polished graphics, but more the level design itself and having a appearance which is very atmospheric in character. But I think that the advantage is that for the most part, every indie developer's game is their first game, and because of that, they're not starting from a mold that they've made. With large publishers, there's already the mold of Halo, the mold of Call of Duty, the mold of Battlefield, and they're operating within the context of that precedent that they've already set. While this is their first game, is their very first game, as far as I know. I think they based it off of a tabletop game that they made, but that it's their first video game, and that means that they're having to reinvent the wheel, and because of that, they're thinking about what style of wheel works the best for their game. And there are disadvantages associated with that, but there are also advantages.
Wait, so wouldn't that mean that if a AAA game starts a new title, there's basically no difference of it being an indie game? So,
well, I mean, there are some differences, like because there's a publisher and a developer when there's a non-independent game. There's that separation between those that are writing the game and are closest to the game and those that are marketing the game and making decisions about it. So, you do have an aspect of bureaucratic meddling and things like that getting in the way. But aside from that, the only difference, I mean, they're both game developers. The only difference is one has a publisher and one doesn't.
One thing that I've noticed, like so far from looking at this gameplay, for I mean, like, it seems like it has some more things that we're not used to in AAA games. I mean, it has, well...
Yeah, like that green mist sort of sheen, the sunlight thing. That...
What are you talking about?
If you look... it's not really apparent right here. Maybe if your character looks off the ground. But... yeah, right there, in the distance. The atmosphere of the game is definitely more of a focus as opposed to Homefront, where it really was more of a battlefield. This is much more of a landscape.
Yeah, I've actually noticed that with a lot of AAA games. I mean, but except for The Last of Us. I mean, that game was beautiful. But I mean,
that's kind of my point. AAA games can work. The Last of Us was the first. There was no mold that they were operating within. While games like Battlefield, there isn't really that much that they do
to improve it.
Yeah,
completely. Well, so do you think that if Last of Us ever gets a sequel, it'll be just like, well, what we're talking about, how doing that is a problem, having sequels to a AAA game causes a problem, which is why AAA is not really the best?
Oh, I mean, it's obviously not a categorical statement. Like, it's not like every single AAA sequel has to be bad, but there is definitely a tendency, and you see this not only with video games, but you see it with movies too, where when they try and make a sequel that uses sort of the same formula, then it tends not to really, break its own ground, take its own path and own perspective on things. It's really just a rehash of what worked before. It's not really innovative.
Okay, well, I'm guessing that most of the biggest problem with having an indie game is probably budget, right, and time. I mean, from like seeing the indie movie.
That's basically why publishers came about in the first place. It used to always be that all games were independent, and publishers grew from the fact that you needed capital up front to fund programmers in the first place.
Yeah, and I guess since indie developers, they have a side job, or they don't have any income, and so they're trying to rush out this game. But one thing that I've actually noticed from all the games on Steam and all that, it seems like there's a lot less competition within indie games than AAA games. I mean, right? You've noticed that.
Yeah, there's definitely sort of the neck and neck Battlefield and Call of Duty aspect, and that does mean that they have to work really hard to attract gamers to their titles. But because they always have to worry about, how does this Battlefield shape up against the older Battlefield? How does Call of Duty 2 compare to Call of Duty 1 and that sort of thing? Because they're always operating against that mold, it's always going to have the same flaws that you've already described.
Yeah, and I guess one thing is,
yeah, a mysterious thing filled you, wasn't falling at all. Only the power of a great sigh could tell us what happened to you.
That was pretty disappointing. I can't believe you said, "Oh yeah, you'll survive a fall like that."
But I could survive it because I have cyber upgrades. My character is pretty tricked out, while yours is a little bit more. I mean, I think I'm like level 80 something, and you're level 31, so.
Well, okay, yeah. One thing that I've noticed with indie games, though, compared to like other games, really, AAA games or AA games, is that
AA batteries, AAA batteries.
Yeah, I think they got the joke, sister. Anyway, that they focus more on player immersion, or they beef it up. I mean, it's less icing on the cake, but more cake. Like you have a bigger base, a bigger foundation of the game, and you have. Amnesia was a indie game, right?
I believe it was.
Well, yeah, I mean, right there, with Amnesia. I think that if it's not an indie game, then it's at least a very small publisher. I'm pretty sure. I'm not completely positive. I didn't check before I started the video because I'm just now deciding to talk about Amnesia. Anyway, but they seem to have more innovative ideas than AAA games.
That's sort of the benefit of indie games, because they're working only for themselves and not working for a publisher. They get to create the game that they would want to play, and that usually means that they're very immersive games that have an atmosphere and a style of gameplay that works really well.
Yeah, I mean, right here, as an example, you were able to hack something. It's not like one of those weird hacking things where it doesn't take any skill. For example, the BioShock hack, where you need to connect the pipes to control the flow. That's
it was basically the pipe, the classic pipe game, where you had the slime going through the pipes and you had to put the pipe pieces in
before it killed you or something. I have no idea who came up with that idea. I mean, it's clever, but I'm sure it was independent.
Yeah. So, if you had an option between these two games that we've shown, between I and Homefront, which one would you purchase if you could just buy one of them?
Well, I does seem to have some UI problems, as you'll see either now or later on in the video, depending on where I cut it. But it seems to if you compare I and Homefront is I'd probably go with I just because it seems more user-friendly than Homefront, and it doesn't seem like, well, a cash whore game. You know, like a game that's trying to focus on getting money or focus on getting popularity or something. Like with I, it seems like with indie games, it seems like they're more doing it for the fun of it than for the money. I mean, if you think about it, and a good example is Steel Battalion for the Kinect. I mean, that's just...
Yeah, that was definitely a pretty transparent attempt at getting some money.
Yeah, I mean, just trying to use the Kinect to get money, but I mean, they still were doing it for fun, as you could tell, because the storyline was really immersive, and, you know, it just seemed like they had a good time making it. But then there's the other game where, like, for this great example, War Z, or now called Infestation Survivor Stories, that's clearly the game. I mean, I've played it since the very beginning, and I mean, the people just naturally didn't seem to have any fun making the game. They seemed to just be doing it for the money, and instead of like listening to the people on the forums, they deleted posts if they didn't agree with them. You know, they did all that stuff.
Yeah.
But of course, they were independent
quick, I
too.
would like to kind of comment on the grenade system of this game. That was one of the things that was kind of interesting about it, that you'd throw the grenades and then have that sort of readout screen, and they would also kind of double as proximity mines. It's something that I thought was pretty cool about this game's weapon system. But anyway, back to the indie versus publisher.
Yeah, with indie also, it doesn't seem that you can lose support for a game, as in, if the game isn't going well, they won't let it just die. They won't cut it off at the head and stop support for it.
Yeah, it's their life's work. It's their baby, you know. This is the game that Strung on Studios has made, and it's pretty much the only game. So they've actually released tons of patches with tons of bugs fixes over the years.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, even though it's not a very popular game, I mean, I've probably only seen it in the top sellers once when it was on sale for quite a bit on Christmas. I mean, it's not very popular, but it's still really good, and they actually care a lot.
And the developers are actually really active on the Steam forums, explaining and like talking about problems that people might have, like commenting on bugs and things like that. And also just on general storyline comments. Like there's a mega thread about the storyline of this game because it's really complicated, and they commented a little bit in there as well. So they're very active developers, which is really nice.
Yeah, and what you said about the baby, like the game is their baby. I remember you remember watching Indie Movie, right? And how the guy was making Super Meat Boy with his friend, and he was able to put all of his crazy whack ideas in there, and he just made it him inside the video game. Like he put his life into the video game, like everything that he's done in his life in there.
Yeah, and that I think goes back to the fact that the game developers are working only for themselves when they're independent. They're not working for a publisher. They don't really have a 9-to-5 job in the same sense, and because of that, they're really motivated to create a game that they really love. And they're also not limited by a publisher. They're not required to create a game that they don't want to.
Yeah, but of course, there's always a problem that sometimes doesn't get fixed in indie games. So
yeah, indie games certainly aren't a perfect model. There are actually benefits to having a set publisher.
Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question or not, which one I would buy. Did I?
Yeah, you said that in the end that you would buy I because you thought that it was more innovative and interesting.
Yeah. Well, on top of that, also
And the UI.
Yeah, it's still being actively updated, patched, things like that. So overall, for any situation, if I had to choose between a AAA game that I've heard a lot about, and it's kind of kind of half and half. It's good, but it's not bad. Wait, it's bad, but it's not good. I mean, you know what I'm saying. And an indie game which has a lot of popularity, but it's the same thing. Like if they're equal on like Metascore, I'd choose the indie game because it's probably going to get patched significantly more than in a AAA.
I'm not so sure about that. I mean,
Oh, yeah, it depends on the person.
The developers are likely to be very interested in the game and are probably willing to redress community problems. But I mean, there are plenty of large publishers that do that. For instance, ArenaNet has been really active in responding to community requests in Guild Wars 2.
Yeah. Well, I guess that brings a wrap to our commentary. So, please rate and subscribe. Later.